Hey everybody, so recently on stream, after winning the Dual Cash Cup Finals, Peterbot announced that him and Cold would actually be dropping Poyo and instead would be playing with a Tarper like Booga, Rise, or Acorn. He said that with playing with Poyo in trios, he'd be limiting his ability by having to IGL and Tarp instead of fragging. Now their main choice at the current moment is Booga, and here's why I think that's a bad idea. So the last time we had trios, which was almost 3 years ago, we didn't have all of these new age movement items like katanas, grapple blades, dashes, hammers, and we didn't even have things like sprinting and mantling. This brings a question: how important is a tarper? Tarpers were used to be used to tarp out rotates for the team, get to front side of zone, etc. But with these new movement items, should teams be really looking for a designated player to only tarp, or is really looking for a second fragger a better option? Now, when they dropped Pollo, they picked up Booga. So the clear choice behind dropping Pollo for Booga is that Booga was considered back in the day one of the greatest trio tarpers / IGLs back in Chapter 2. And since Cold and Peterbot think that they need a tarper, Booga seems to be the clear choice at the current moment. But there is some glaring issues with picking Booga. After Peterbot's recent FNCS wins and the LAN win, his ego is massive, probably one of the largest in the region, second only to Booga. Now, if you have the two largest ego players on one team, bad things are going to happen. Now, Peterbot and Booga are supposedly friends. They played in FNCS together, multiple tournaments together. So it seems like they are on good terms, but now with this new trio, the weight and expectations on them, considering that Cold has 2 FNCS wins, Booga has 3 FNCS wins and the World Cup win, and now Peterbot winning back-to-back FNCSs, the weight on these teams' shoulder is really, really high. So, with 2 massive ego players on a team where the weight is really high, if either player makes a mistake and the other player calls them out on it, I'm not sure whether or not their egos could take this, especially if it's repeated over and over and over again. Even though Peterbot currently, many would admit, he's probably the best player in the world, I'm really not sure how this trio could potentially succeed with all of these bad vibes. Now, personally, I think Poyo would be a much better option for this trio. In Chapter 5, when playing with Peterbot, Pollo actually fully transitioned from being a top-level fragger to a full support player. And in the upcoming FNCS offseason, there is really no reason why he couldn't continue working on transitioning to becoming a tarper. The main reason that Peterbot says that Pollo just wouldn't work is because Peterbot technically IGL'd Pollo during Chapter 5 for their 3 FNCS wins and their second place, and now that many IGLs like Acorn, Rise, Canada are also transitioning to being tarpers, Peterbot also feels that he'd be holding himself back from the great fighter that he is if he played with Pollo. Because if he was playing with Pollo, he'd also have to tarp, and he thinks that he would also have to tarp IGL. But if he brings in Booga, he wouldn't have to worry about IGLing and tarping, and would just be alone, able to frag with Cold, continue getting refreshes for Booga, and they would just win every game. But if they transition to Pollo into a tarper in the coming months, he wouldn't have to worry about tarping, and some of the problems that we talked about earlier with the ego wouldn't be nearly as bad, because Pollo doesn't have the ego, and that if Peterbot called him out on something, that he would respond. So this is one of the main issues that you have, is that with this upcoming offseason, it's nearly 7 months long. So in that 7 months, in 7 months this season, Pollo became, from one of the top level fraggers, to likely the best support player on North America right now. So I really just don't see a reason why why they have not chosen to do this transition. Now, an important counter argument to what I'm saying is that with the third player on this trio, who I haven't really talked about much, being Cold, who's probably one of the most chill pros on this region. If you watch some of their videos back in the day with Acorn in their FNCS games, this last 2 chapters, him and Acorn were really a very chill duo. He's a very nice person. And with Cold potentially in the trio, with Booga and Peterbot, would their vibes really be that bad? I'm not sure. Now, another interesting point, as a counter argument to what I'm saying, is with Raz in the call. So, if you guys don't know, Raz is Peterbot and Pollo's coach, who was with them in the calls during many of their FNCS wins and Duo Cash Cups. But now that Peterbot and Pollo are splitting, Raz has to make a choice of whether or not during NA events he will stay on call with Pollo's new trio or Peterbot's new trio. He needs to make that choice. But if he does make the choice to stay with Peterbot, which personally I think he does, because he will get more results from staying with Peterbot if they succeed, can Booga's ego take another IGL in the call? Because what Booga is going to be doing for this trio is by tarping and IGLing. Now, just because Peterbot is considered technically an IGL doesn't mean that he is really the best IGL, especially for a trios event. So, they brought Bugha into IGL as Bugha is considered a really, really good trios IGL. But with Raz in the call, I don't know what Bugha is going to be able to do. Can Bugha's ego take Raz in the call as well, especially if Raz and Bugha have different ideas on how they want to IGL this team? Now, these questions definitely 100% need to be answered before we can really see what will happen with this trio. Because if the vibes are able to stay strong and Peterbot and Cold continue to be the great mechanical fraggers that they are, this trio has the opportunity to win multiple FNCSs and dominate the region. But if this trio doesn't manage to do that, the vibes fall, Raz and Bugha have conflicts, Bugha and Peterbot's egos collide, then who knows? This trio might not even place in the top 10. So it really, really depends on whether or not they can keep their egos in check, whether or not Raz can figure out how to keep them in check, and whether or not Cold can keep the vibes together. Overall, when you weigh all of these pros and cons in this argument, it seems to me like training Pollo to be a good tarper, as he has consistently proven time and time again that he can be trained and that his playstyle can be changed. This seems to be a better option. Another point is that when you use somebody like Poyo, you don't have to rebuild the team chemistry again, because when you bring Bugha in, you're creating an entire new trio of chemistry, rather than just having to already have Peterbot and Pollo have great chemistry and then just adding Cold in. Now, Cold definitely can be added into a trio very easily. He's very chill, he's very nice. This will work out perfectly if they just add in Cold. So overall, if you weigh the pros and cons, there's really no reason for Bugha to be their number one choice. Now, of course, there are other choices instead of Bugha, and you could also see a player like Rise, who's a great IGL who's been on the rise recently. No pun intended. He could also fit very well in here. Also does not have the ego size, so Rise could be a better choice. And then there's also Acorn. And the interesting thing with Acorn is that he might already have a trio, which I'll be talking about in another video. But if he does not end up playing with this trio, him and Cold already have the ability to play with each other. Now, I'm pretty sure Cold and Acorn didn't split on the best terms. I'm not sure what was going on there, but I think their land placement is pretty clear to show that one of the best duos in the world, placing not even in the top 15, not a good look for them. So I don't know if they split very well on good terms, but it is very interesting to see if they were to potentially go out on a limb and choose Acorn, could that work? Would Cold be okay with that? So if you do like this new style of content that I'm trying to do, please let me know. Stay tuned for one of my new videos soon, and have a good night.